Okay. Oh, the kitty came to join.
It's actually a dog.
Oh, it's a dog. And so now I can see it clearly. The doggy came to
Yeah.
join.
Yeah.
Um, well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm glad we're on the phone.
Me too, and pleasure to meet you as well.
Okay, so this is, of course, entirely your time. I have your intake form, and I had an opportunity to really get into your chart a little bit more. It's after you understand some of the inner workings, your chart actually shows differently than first impression because it goes much deeper into a potential spiritual transformational energy,
Yeah.
which kind of speaks to the death and rebirth of self, the break from the original impression or the energy that was governing perhaps some of our earlier decisions. It really does call you into a much more deeply spiritual, far less material realm. Um, but I'll let you start simply by saying what it is that you'd like to accomplish in this discussion and the areas that you want to focus on. And then we'll just open up the discussion as I start to bring you some insight into what I see. I obviously encourage you to throw out questions, and we'll just keep a nice stream of dialogue going back and forth.
Okay. So I discovered you when Linda G interviewed you. So I really enjoy watching her YouTube videos an awful lot. And I studied astrology a tiny bit when I was young. Always been very intrigued by spiritual things and divination tools and things like that, even as a kid. And I think it's a direct result of seeing my father die in front of me when I was 6, because it got me wondering about, what's life all about, and where do we go, and what is this existence we live in. And I've had, a lot of struggles along the way. I've done very well, though, I have to say, despite it all. I'm a very sensitive person, but I'm also, I guess I'm pretty strong, and I don't realize my own strength. And I think that's part of what I'm here to learn is my own resolve. So I'm 57, and I am in a job that I have hated for a long time, but it's offered me some great opportunities living overseas. And the past year, or 2 years, actually, I've been back. I lived in London for about 7. Okay. And it was a horrible situation in the end. And it was really odd. And I could never figure out what happened or why it happened. But this guy came in, didn't want me there, and made sure he found a way to get rid of me.
Wow.
And it was horrible. And I couldn't figure out, like, every time I move overseas, I end up getting, like, the last time it was in Paris and then Rome. And then I got dragged back because of September 11th. And I was, like, determined to get back, got this job. And within, I don't know, 8 years of being there, I finally was able to get a position overseas. And then I got dragged back again because of this situation. I was like, what is it about me being overseas in Europe with me having to get dragged back to the US? I want to know, I'm just trying to figure out my next step, because I don't like living in Washington. I love it because I have friends here and it's home and I love my home. But I feel like I'm kind of at a crossroads, and I'm trying to figure out what next. I mean, there's so many different things I've tried, and nothing's hit. And I don't know if it's because I haven't been ready or brave enough to make the leap. So I'm trying to figure out purpose. And you started talking about that in the beginning. So that's in a nutshell why I contacted you.
So I'm going to point out just a few synchronicities between you and I, and then I'll go into some of what I'm seeing in your chart.
Okay.
So I actually grew up in Albany, New York.
Oh, wow. That's weird. Where did you live in Albany?
I lived right off Western Road on Marion Avenue, which is just one in from, you had the main intersection there. It was, so that was the next block of South Manning Boulevard. So it was Western Manning, and we were a block over.
Yeah, no, I know exactly where that is. I lived off of Wolf Road. Do you know Wolf Road?
Yeah, of course I know Wolf Road. It's where we used to go for dinner and shopping, Colony Center.
Yeah,
before there was Cross Gates, there was Colony Center.
Yeah. I had not been back there in years, and I've been having, ever since I got back, my 2 dogs died, who I was over in London with, and I got this guy in Albany, of all places, because I was looking for a puppy, and he just so happened to be one of the breeders who had a puppy. So we're all 3 from Albany.
That's so funny. And now you're in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
So the other synchronicity, and this is just, I've had a similar experience. I was transferred abroad to London actually in 2005, wound up in Paris for a few years until early '09, got called back, worked very hard to get back to Europe, got sent back to London in 2016, only to be called back in 2017, and then eventually got tired of being dependent on the corporate space to get me to where I wanted to live. And so ended up going through my grandfather, who was a Polish citizen, and entitled me to EU citizenship, because there's 5 or 6 countries that will do blood lineage citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And so just by virtue of knowing energetically that I was more aligned with the cultures of Europe than I was with the cultures of North America, particularly American culture, even though my career actually, for the most part, was quite lucrative, I was well rewarded for my contributions in the corporate space in the US, I always felt more at home living in Europe, even without the family or without the language, for example. It just felt more aligned with my being. And so I worked really hard to get back here. And on a very practical note, although it took about 20 months or so, thrilled to have that EU citizenship now. Just
so
thrilled.
where are you?
So
now?
right now I'm in London. I'm just between King's Cross and Angel. Actually, I have a nice apartment. I just moved back a few months ago.
That's really nice. Yeah, I know that because I lived in Angel when I first moved there, in a hotel until I moved, and I ended up in Fulham, then Hampstead, and then my last go around was Holland Park, which was my favorite.
Yeah, they're. I mean, once you get over the weather, especially if you travel a little bit or have access to, you can vacation during the winter months just to break up kind of the dark, gloomy, 6-month stretch from sometime in October right through to say March. As long as you can put that into your lifestyle, London's a wonderful place to call home. And I say it now in the context of your chart. So you said you studied astrology a little bit. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say your astrological kind of acumen is?
Probably about a 5. When it got too complicated, I just said I'm more of an intuitive than I am someone who is practical. I mean, you with your finance background, I could see where you'd be a little bit better at the practicalities of astrology.
Yeah, and it's funny because my finance background wants me to have everything in astrology really well organized, as if there's an answer to almost like a mathematical equation. And there is an element certainly of being organized with astrology, and I do use a few tools that give me some numerical values to help me really focus. But I found that the best astrologers, and for every one amazing astrologer, you probably have 9 or 10 that are just kind of fumbling through the space. For every amazing astrologer, they have this intuition coupled with their own life experience, coupled with their usually very high IQ, which pulls together a really nice understanding of somebody's purpose and intent. And so that's why it's tricky, like any industry. And it can be the medical space, it could be the legal space, but certainly in the spiritual space, it's the whole beware of false prophets. And there's always different things that can tug at you that might seem interesting. And so it's a little bit of obviously using your own judgment. Where it gets really interesting right now in your life is that you have your second Saturn return approaching. And so when I asked you what your acumen is in astrology, there's a few layers that you end up learning through. You learn obviously the planets and their placement and the energy in your chart. Like you're a Scorpio rising, but you have a lot of planets in fire and earth. So the first impression that you would make would actually be quite different from your true self. People would get to know you differently than how they perceive you on first interaction, right? And so it speaks to, and you have Neptune sitting right along your ascendant. So it's almost like it's hard for people to pinpoint kind of your energetic space, but as time goes by, they get to experience you a little bit differently. That's like first level astrology is general energy and speaks to compatibility and the people that we keep company with. And why is it that we get off to London and a new boss comes in and hates us, where we were doing so well there for 7 years and there was no problem before. And
I was the boss though. He was not the boss. That's why you like it.
Okay. So, but like you just speak to the energetic, and actually that may even refer to the transits, which is why is it that everything seems to be in order and then something shifts? What was it that changed? So there's different levels to astrology. The imprint of who we are and our energetic being would be like level 1. Our purpose or intention for this incarnation and the various aspects of our life that will be accentuated would be kind of level 2. And then the movement or the transits, which are speaking to the variations in our life, I refer to as level 3. And I say it just as an all-encompassing point to our discussion. You have your second Saturn return. If you were to break your life into 3 primary chapters, the first being your youth, the second being your adulthood, and then the 3 transitioning you really more into, I wouldn't call it retirement in the traditional sense. It would more be your state of wisdom or just acceptance, or kind of the person that you'll be that will, like taking all that you've learned and just settling in with it. You're approaching now your second Saturn return, which is closing out your second chapter, which is really the work and accomplishment and the drive and motivation, self-discovery, and entering into the third chapter, which is putting it all into action to create a life that really feels most at peace or congruent with who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like, our first chapter, we're kind of discovering self. Our second chapter, we're putting it to good use insofar as we're earning money and we're establishing ourselves. Our third chapter lets us just be us, where we want to be, with the people we want to be with, and be at peace with it.
Mm-hmm.
And when Saturn makes that second transit, it calls into question what you're doing with your life and where you've been. And it wants to make sure, whether you realize it or not, that you're in alignment with what it is that your soul was here to learn. And by extension, if you haven't been learning those lessons, it makes life very, very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when I talk to people and they're just really at peace and everything is great, and they're approaching their first or second Saturn return, it usually means that they're doing what optimistically, what their soul wanted them to do as an effort to learn and to grow accordingly. If I speak to them and they're really struggling, like I talked to a gentleman, he was in a deep depression for a number of years in his late 20s because he was completely misaligned with his intention. When you speak to different people, it shows very clearly whether or not they figured out where they want to be and what they want to be doing. And because we're talking about spiritual energy, it almost always, not always, but it almost always, if somebody is on the path, which is the path of spiritual discovery, self-awareness and awakening, which is a big part of your chart and your calling, when somebody is deeply on that path, then the Saturn return will affirm the decisions that you're making and help you situate them so that your time is well spent to maximize whatever it is that's going to come next.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, as we look at your chart, because you have Saturn sitting in Capricorn in the third house refers specifically to your community, to where you exist. Saturn is a planet of kind of its integrity, its structure, its discipline. It also happens to be time management and resource management. So with the second return coming up, it's going to make this primary question your grand question, which is, where do I want to be? In a practical sense, what's the community that I want to be surrounded by? And more specifically, what is it that I want to be doing in that community? So that's the very first kind of foundational discussion. There's, it's kind of funny because your chart is so heavily weighted in just 4 houses.
Yeah, it is.
Right. So there is the wound in the family space, which would speak to the loss of your father. It sits in Pisces, which means obviously there is an emotional element and confusion, which usually means it happened early in life, as you described. But then everything else practically that I'm speaking of carries you into self-discovery, ambition, achievement, community connection, finding your place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the theme of the chart. There's no overriding call. It's not saying that you didn't get married. There's no overriding call to marriage. It's not saying that you don't have children. There's no overriding call to children. It's not saying that you didn't pursue some passionate love and chase it around the world. It's saying that there was a ton of energy calling you into self-discovery and ambition and accomplishment, as well as to some degree, a degree of sacrifice and or spiritual growth and awareness. Like that, in a very quick nutshell, is kind of the foundation of what I'm seeing in your existence.
It makes complete sense because I never got married. Don't know if I ever really want to.
Yeah.
Don't kids, didn't, had the choice, didn't want them. And it's all been about just focusing on my life and expanding it. So that makes perfect sense.
Okay, so now that we have, I always just kind of test the waters to make sure that what I'm seeing is actually what's happening. And that gives me, obviously, sometimes people have their birth time wrong, but oftentimes it just gives me confirmation that we're on the right track. Let's Let's see. Let me just get a few practical questions in place then. So, what would be? It sounds like you want to get back over to Europe. Is that kind of the hope and priority?
Yeah.
It
I
is.
go back and forth on it, but it just really does calm me. And same with you. I found out Portugal. I'm half Portuguese. Then I'm going to try to get my EU citizenship through Portugal.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, so I have to learn the language completely, though.
Is that a prerequisite
to get over there, which is really?
Is that a prerequisite for citizenship?
Yeah. Yeah, which is really difficult.
Which is really difficult.
Part.
Portuguese is particularly challenging, especially if you have an Anglophone background. But that said, it is obviously it's nice to have it. You know, there is a second route to getting Portuguese citizenship, which you can buy your way in as well. So if regardless of how you go, so I think that would be wonderful for you, because for you to be energetically aligned with your community is hugely important. Actually, this chart would be, it would be affected if it's misaligned with its community. You have Jupiter sitting there in Aquarius, also in the third house. It wants to be expansive. It wants to feel connected. It certainly wants to feel as if it's ideas and experiences. It's visionary. It calls you forward. All of that would be greatly enhanced in the right community, the right setting. You know, it's like to call you into the best version of you, and also for you to feel most at peace. It's strong prerequisite that the third house is in congruency, which means that you have a healthy connection with the people that you're around and the collective consciousness that defines some of that daily influence. That's really important. And so based on the timing, this Saturn return is going to start to intensify through next year, and it's going to start to really put a little bit of pressure to figure out where you want to be to set you up for that next chapter. If you were to go the Portuguese citizenship route, if it was anything like what I went through, it was 20 months of effort. So I would certainly say sooner. And that we had a few snags because my grandfather, there were some archive records that I couldn't get a hold of because he hadn't been passed for 20 years, and we had to go through so it set us back about 6 months. I have heard of people that can go through the EU citizenship process in as little as 6 months. But generally people plan on a year, which I think, I don't know, it would probably be a fair expectation. The other option, of course, they have a nice tax bracket for people that are coming from afar, as long as they're willing to invest a certain amount. So if it was something that you were really committed to for a longer term and you bought property there, you might be able to skirt some of the language requirements.
I think they call it a golden visa.
They do, I know. And the locals are upset about it because the property values keep going up because Portugal has been so affordable for so long.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like you've looked into it. So that right off the bat is hugely important. Do you have a plan B, by the way, in the event, or how you're going to spend your time leading into? I imagine you're still working at this point.
I am. I'm still working. I came back and see with the same place, same company, and I've been working there, and it's just a really awful place to work. I do fine,
Yeah.
I'm okay. I got back. The people who were back there realized that I was competent because they didn't know me, and then they realized what happened, and they pulled the guy back who caused the problem.
The damage was done at that point.
Damage was already done. And I had my residency too, because I had been there for 5 years. So I applied for my residency, but all was lost at that point. And as you know, it's really hard. These salaries are really low in London as well, and it's expensive. So you have to find a way to make money outside of the constraints of the poor pay in London.
Yeah, no, Europe's a wonderful place to live. It's a great place to retire. It's not a great place to generate an income as a local.
Did you quit finance altogether? You did.
Yeah, I spent the first 5 years of my career were in finance, and then I got into financial technology, which was kind of global business development work, traveling and selling. I can tell you I was good at my job. I was never aligned with my job. It's a lot of what's called me into the space to work with people. Like if your body is sick, you go to a doctor. If your mind isn't well, you can go to a therapist, or obviously seek refuge in community or family and friends. But what if your soul is misaligned? Like, what if your spiritual energy isn't being nourished? Where do you go? And for years, you used to go to the church, but that doesn't work. And the church never really worked. It worked in a religious context. It had its moments, obviously, with spiritual intention, but more recently, people have strayed from it. And so the work that I'm doing, which has just become so fundamental to my own journey, just helping talk through that convalescence of practical choices with spiritual intention. Because when you're in alignment and you can go into that flow state and you find yourself in that state of like stillness where everything just feels right, I can't even put words around how amazing that feeling is. You know? And so, yeah, I was on Wall Street for a while. I actually enjoyed Wall Street more than financial sales, except that Wall Street was more volatile and the personalities were a little bit crazy. The sales arena that I got into for financial technology was good, but it was sterile and it was all just about the deal. There was no heart. There was no soul. It was just a hyper material environment with amazing amounts of stress every day.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was kind of the example that was set for me in my self-discovery. I was a little out of touch. You and I share, we both have our moon in Libra, which means that there's a pleasing energy in our subconscious. It wants to create harmony and balance. So even if the Libra moon is being victimized in some way, it has trouble sometimes standing up for itself. It has trouble at times figuring out, you know, that conflict is necessary and actively creating the energy that would get them to a state of justice and fairness, because the Libra just wants balance and harmony.
Yes.
And so that, in your case, is sitting in your 12th house. In a 12th house, it's also sacrificial, which is like, okay, I'm going to do what I need to do to help others and to be in this state. Yep. And all the while continue to create an environment where people are in balance and in acceptance. But it can come very much at a cost to self. And when the self is being sacrificed too much, then you're creating a disharmonious environment within self, but also in the environment around you, you become too easily taken advantage of, and then you become responsible for those imbalances that you're creating. Right?
Said. Yep.
Right. And so you also, as the sun in Sagittarius, it's very good at taking interest in other people and going deep into their lives. It doesn't so innately want to go deep into their own lives, but your Sag is sitting in the first house, which means figure out self. And by extension, your subconscious in Libra is also saying, and recognize when you're too agreeable, recognize when you're being taken advantage of, recognize when you're sacrificing too much of yourself in the names of the needs of others, especially if the other's intentions are nefarious or otherwise detrimental to your own well-being. And to come to that awareness, right, like that's on a soul level, is to start to understand yourself and how you show up, and how being too agreeable is actually a form of energetic imbalance, and that becomes your responsibility. It's really, really challenging, you know? And if it's not enough, you're carrying all these challenging aspects down to the third house. Third house, I mentioned earlier, is where you feel most at home. It's where you belong. Third house is also opinions and beliefs. And so when the subconscious, which is naturally quite sacrificial and agreeable, is carrying a bad aspect into the belief structure, some of your own beliefs might be like, okay, are these really healthy beliefs, or is this a byproduct of my intent, my constant need to sacrifice myself, or my default state of just being agreeable? Like, are these really healthy beliefs that I'm holding on to? And it's asking you, especially now as you're moving into that Saturn return, is to say, okay, fundamentally, Mary, like, what do you really believe in? And who is it that you really want to be in this world? And recognizing that you have all the tools and all the growth potential and a lot of the spiritual wisdom, which sits in the chart, that lets you, if you give it the right time and effort, to really come to terms with what it is that you believe in. And then from there, establish healthy beliefs, healthy boundaries, healthy sense of self, and kind of develop a meaningful, deep connection with the world around you off of that foundation.
I feel very stuck there. And I think you summed it up. And I feel very, very stuck in, what do I believe? What do I believe? What are my beliefs? You know what I mean? because I do tend
It's
to.
weird. I never have any throat problems. And I got on the phone and right away my throat clogged up with you on the other side. And it's been tricky for me lately because I've been going deeper and deeper into space and I started feeling everybody. There's something about finding your voice that's not, I'm feeling it on this end.
Ah, that's interesting.
Like
Yeah.
this is about your beliefs and your ability to articulate those beliefs and your ability to kind of stand your ground. But it starts first with recognizing your own sense of self and understanding of self so that you can actually establish exactly what it is that's most important to you. It's your
Mhm.
higher standards. It's almost like it's because it's Jupiter in the third. So it's dealing with morality. It's like, what's really right here? And because your subconscious is in Libra, if you're being victimized or being taken advantage of or whatever unfolded in the career space, like had you seen it unfolding and actively been able to scream out loud, like, no, this is an injustice, right? Maybe
Yeah.
you would have been able to arrest that process and it wouldn't have affected you the way it did.
Well, I actually did, and I got an attorney, and I
Oh,
wrote
good.
letters, and I stated exactly what the situation was and what was going on, and no one was listening. I just got stonewalled. It was one of the worst situations I've ever been in my life. It was the injustice of it, and this guy is still going after me with complaints that he was Mexican American, and I discriminated against him because he was a Mexican American. My staff was telling me he's trying to get rid of you. I was like, no, he's not trying to get rid of me. Why would he do that? They were right. And
Unbelievable.
he's a really bad guy, a really bad guy.
You know,
Uh,
when,
and
yeah, go ahead. Tell me more.
no, I got back the guy the whole place is really corrupt. The guy who was in the head of the newsroom at the time, who I didn't know, who I never really cared for, I never trusted him, came over to me about a month in and said, God, now I know what you went through. That guy's a son of a bitch. And he was already on his way back and he was giving him a hard time. And I said, too late, too little, too late. I said, now I'm back here.
Yeah, I've been through the same. And once you're moved back, it's so much harder.
It is harder because you have resentment, you
Yeah,
know?
no, the energy around the entire situation has gone sour.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is, I don't know when the moment comes. I don't know if you've reached it yet. My guess is that either something will show clearly why that had to unfold, or you'll just simply move into a greater sense of acceptance for what happened. Like
Yeah.
that's one of those moments that we just have to, especially if you stood up, if you fought, if you had the attorney, if everything within your control to slow down what was happening was invoked and yet it didn't change the outcome,
Mm-hmm.
then there's something greater beyond what we can see on the surface that was at play to redirect you.
Yeah. And I will tell you, despite my Libra moon and wanting to please people and everything, I can be pretty fearsome, and I think it's that Venus and Scorpio.
Yeah.
I can really push through a situation when I need to.
Well, which is great. Which,
Yeah, because I have to depend on that every now and then, and people are shocked when it comes out. Like I didn't expect that, and I'm like, well, now there is this side to me where I'm not gonna play dead. I will go after you in the worst way that you will never understand.
That's so funny. So I can tell you, and that is funny. So there is a lot of dichotomies in your chart. So your rising sits in Scorpio.
Mhm.
The governing planet for Scorpio is Mars. Mars is conflict. It actually is it's inner conflict that kind of spills out. It can, and in your case, it's sitting in the second house, which it governs the practical matters of life, a lot of materialism or financial matters, but it's sitting in Sagittarius, so it slows it down a little bit. It's not as intense, but by virtue of it being what's known as the depositor, it's a theme for the chart, which is the ability. It's kind of, there's almost like there's two sides to you in some regards, because there is probably when you're in a healthy, stable, balanced space, I can imagine it would be pleasing and harmonization. And then perhaps like you're describing, you get triggered and the Martian energy takes over.
No, that's really true. That's really true, and I think it scares the hell out of people. I know it
They
does.
don't, because they don't expect it.
They don't expect it. I
Because
don't expect it because I'm someone who listens to people yesterday I went into work and I have a chair next to me, and the minute I got in, I had 4 people come to tell me their personal problems.
That is
You
too.
know, and it's and I love talking to people, and I'm really good at giving them advice.
Yeah.
And I think people perceive me that way, but then when they push me up against a wall, they're shocked at my, you know, my energy. I can clear the room with my energy when I get in, like that. I don't like it.
Yeah,
I really
I was
don't
gonna
like
say, how do you feel when you're in that space? Are you still in control, or do you feel like
No,
it overwhelms
no,
you?
it overwhelms me.
Yeah,
It overwhelms me. I'm grateful for it because it's gotten me through situations, but I think it needs
yeah.
to be harnessed a bit.
Yeah, so that is the dark, the shadowy side of Libra. Is the subconscious gets pushed too far, and then it can go and it almost becomes like an Aryan energy where it gets really intense and impulsive. That
Mm-hmm.
depositor being your Martian energy means that it's already in the chart.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you two other questions. What was your mother's birthday?
Uh, it is April 26th, 1934.
All right, your relationship with her?
There's a deep connection, but we are conflicting. And again, it's one of those things where she's always tried to control me, control the situation, and she
Yeah.
can't control me, and she doesn't like the fact that I'm that way. But yet I'm the first person she comes to for advice, and then when I give her advice, she's like, God, I can't believe you're so smart. You're so good at figuring these things out. I'm good with the practical stuff, and looking and giving her insight into her own life. And then she's a very funny, tricky character. I think she must have Gemini somewhere, because she's my greatest ally and my greatest enemy at the same time.
Yeah. So, and that does show your moon sitting in the 12th house. It speaks to the relationship with mother, and you have so many challenging aspects in this chart. It makes everything, it creates an energy it just bristles. Like when you have a square or even an opposition, there are
Mm-hmm.
multiple energies that they're not congruent. And you can look at it, the chart that I sent you, if you look at the grid on the bottom,
Let's see.
this is just a good indication of it. It's kind of interesting. It's fun to see how it's manifested,
Yeah.
especially on just like a first call, for example. So when you look down at the bottom there, you can see the grid on the right hand side. It speaks to, you think about in the context of astrology, it puts the earth at the center, and then it tells you based on the moment of your birth
Mm-hmm.
what energy was influencing, which is what the soul was passing through as it moved into the incarnation.
Yeah.
It speaks to, because each of the different planets carry their own energy, and of course it's all being lit by the sun. So your sun sign is in Sagittarius, which is one of the more agreeable signs of the zodiac. It's actually one of the most likable signs of the zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you look at virtually every other planet, which is shown down in that grid on the right-hand side, and the relationship that they had to each other, if they were positioned at a square, meaning that the Earth was at that point and that you had one energy and a second energy converging at that same point, the
Mm-hmm.
squares basically mean that they're not congruent, that they just don't align themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in the context the mother or father, from a childhood standpoint, the mother would be represented by the moon, and you can see that you have two squares sitting right up against the moon. It's
Mm-hmm.
carrying that same kind of beliefs and ideas and wisdom. It's carrying right into the 12th house. In the context of the 12th house, it's karmic energy. So your mother sits in the 12th house, which means that you carried karma in with your mother. And there's not an easy congruency between your ideas and your discipline and kind of the structure of your life and how your mother connects with it. Sometimes, if this is really badly aspected, it could be the loss of a mother. But in this context, it's just it's like there's more of a struggle to connect with mother the way you're describing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much karma in this chart. Like it's and it's an individualized chart. The irony is that everybody can come to you and you can bring them great wisdom and such. The question stays behind, though. The lingering question is, who do you go to for your own support?
Right.
Like, that's also part of the problem when you have this kind of energy. This chart actually likes to be in company of others. It's a question of whether it can truly be itself and really open up comfortably in that company.
Yep. That's right. That's right. And I crave a lot of time being alone for that reason these days. I get to the point where I'm just around people so much, and like I know why I need to be alone. I need to shut down because I need to figure this all out. You know, I need to connect to myself better because I don't feel connected at times.
And so tell me, just give me a sense, when you don't feel connected, how does it manifest?
Probably in a different way. It manifests itself in a little bit of depression,
Yeah.
feeling lost, being disorganized,
Yeah.
um, uh, feeling lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you feel most connected, what's the energy that comes out?
That flow that you talk about is the energy that comes out.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know it all too well. Do you, how are your dreams?
Ooh, complicated.
Have you started to tap into them?
They're, you know, they can affect my whole day.
Yeah.
I just started a dream journal again, just because they've been pretty intense and a lot to do with past stuff. They're very vivid. I have very vivid dreams, and and sometimes they can be, you know, they're very emotional. My dreams are very emotional, and it's about relationships for the most part.
So your dreams are serving two primary purposes, the way I see it here. One is to allow you to help eviscerate the energy of past experiences, because it's sitting in Scorpio, which is going to be calling you back into emotional events of the past. But the second, which is what I love when I see this placement, is that it is a gateway to the spiritual realm. And those dreams, if you're properly in touch with them, are trying to potentially can bring you wisdom or insight or even some type of clairvoyance, which is going to help transition you more into a more permanent spiritual state of being in your conscious space. So think of it as a gateway or as a conduit that's trying to connect you through your subconscious. When the mind's in the subconscious state, when we can turn off the conscious mind, which is what happens when we're sleeping, some people successfully get to it deeply in meditation. Some people can find it if they're in yoga or even in a very quiet state in nature. Like Eckhart Tolle slept on the benches at Hampstead Heath for 2 years, and he just had that bliss running through him. he was so connected at that point. And that was after his first Saturn return. He went through that really deep depressive state because he was misaligned with his intention. I would love to read his chart because he's perfectly in sync with the life that he's living based on his natal chart. But he ended up in that flow. Yeah, he ended up in that beautiful flow state. And when he was able to turn off, it's really not turning off, it's really just accentuating spiritual energy, which dissolves some of the egotic or conscious intention. And that starts to connect you more completely with the spiritual consciousness. In your case, you have a fortuitous placement to open up that channel through your dreams, which can bring you wonderful wisdom. And my guess is that if you really honor those dreams the way you're doing, whether it's with a journal or just to sit quietly when you wake with it and just try to let it wash over you a bit, it will continue to reinforce access into the spiritual realm.
That's good because I feel like that's the direction I need to go in.
So it's funny because I never know how these conversations, I always have an idea of what's going to unfold in these conversations. I never quite know it 100% until it starts to get going. Sometimes it takes a couple conversations, but when I listen to your story, which in so many ways has a synchronicity to my own journey, I right off the bat, I love the idea of you working to get back to a consciousness on a practical basis where you can just be at peace with it, and that the energy, because you're susceptible to the energy around you, because you have a little bit of fight or flight in you, you know, where it's like, okay, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to be calm, I'm going to be patient, I'm going to be balanced, I'm going to be sacrificial until I get pushed too far. And then it's like everybody clears out of the room, like you put it. So to just be in a gentler, more civilized environment, I think in general, it's just going to be healthier.
Yep.
Right? And that's taking care of the mind and body in the simplest of senses, no problem. But then to take that one step further, the Sagittarian energy, you have a few planets in Sag. Obviously, I mentioned your Libra moon. That energy is unbelievably good. And it's male or female. It's almost an androgynous energy. You can attract both sexes into your company because they feel that they can talk to you. They
Mm-hmm.
feel like you're compassionate. They feel like you're understanding. They feel like, and you have the wisdom to give them the right advice. But you also have to find your own offset. Some people will go and just find a spiritual leader, people that they can talk to obviously raise their own consciousness and offset some of their own energy. Other people will find spiritual outlets. Certainly yoga and meditation are the popular ones, but there's a dozen of them that you can call to.
Mm-hmm.
Then more completely, I feel like if you just keep going deeper and deeper into your own space, because you're comfortably in an independent environment, and you start to work with some of your the energy, the subconscious spiritual energy that's coming to you anyways,
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that that will start to bring you into a state of greater peace and harmonization, which will just make everything easier. And I say it because there's enough squares, there's enough bristling energy in this chart that it's part of the journey for you is to find that state of tranquility, that true peace, regardless of what the external world is bringing upon you.
Yeah. And that's the hard part, I think, because I absolutely hate where I'm working. I've been there
Yeah.
for a long time now. I have no respect for anyone there. I'm resentful. But there are moments and pockets of wonderful people and situations and gratification. But it keeps me in a state of imbalance.
Yeah,
You know,
it's not enough.
no.
Darling, it is not enough.
That's why I feel like I need to get, I need to get out of that job. And I've tried things like, should I go and do acupuncture? I was thinking of that at one point because I feel this healing energy that I have,
Yeah,
um,
sure.
that I worked with before with, as a kid, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if it's not hands-on healing kind of thing, it's helping through talking with people.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I actually went to school at University of London started on a degree in psychology, and that blew up in my face too. It was almost like, get out of London, lady. It's not
Yeah.
going to work. And it was a great experience in many ways, but the people there were not very nice, and they weren't very nice to me. So I'm trying to figure out what I can do to help, what transition I need to make. And it sounds like what it is I just have to continue on the.
You have to, so you have it's peculiar because Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto are the most aspected placements in your chart. Neptune deals with its devotion and its sacrifice. It's sitting in your 12th house, which means that it's karmic, which means part of your path is in service. And then it's Plutonian energy, which is it's the evolution, it's the death and rebirth. It also happens to be your rising sign. So Pluto is the second ruling planet of Scorpio. It basically means that there's going to come a time in your life, and I feel like it's been calling to you for a long time, where you allow for the death of self and for the rebirth of the new you. Like it's this grand transformation. So what I would suggest is you do all this together, meaning hold on to your job if you want to hold on to your job because the paycheck is the paycheck. But if the energetic influence of it is so overwhelming, then hasten some of the activities to try to transition into some other line of work, and optimistically let it be something in the healing space that allows you to stay devoted to the needs of others, while also managing the energetic influence that it has on you with all the deep spiritual awakening tools that you're now accessing. I think it's that sweet spot combination of the two.
I think you're right on. I think you're right on the nose.
And get back to Europe, and optimistically, especially, because it is hard to make an income in Europe, but if you're actually a citizen, it's not that expensive to live in
Yeah,
Europe.
because you
Yeah,
get.
it's like Americans have so much anxiety about not having a big income. You get off to Europe, like you don't feel well, you walk into a hospital, and they're just like, okay, we'll see, we'll take care of you. You don't get a bill for $48,000 because, you got, I don't know, you broke your toe and you had to go see a specialist.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know. I've said this to people all along. I was like, once you get over there, and I was in the system, I said, going to a hospital, an emergency room, a couple times I had to go when I was over there. You walk in, you walk out, you get great, great care. And I was, it's just,
And you're paying 20% sales tax on everything. You're paying 40% income tax, like you recognize, but that money is being put to the services that support the community.
Exactly.
Your taxes might be 10% lower in the US, but the money's being put mostly to military and the services are far less available.
Yep. I'm an Elizabeth Warren fan. I'm a total socialist. It's like, I love socialism. I experienced it. I lived it. It's good. It's good.
She's on the Cancer Gemini cusp, which is that sweet spot of compassion and communication, which is great. It's funny because Pete Buttigieg, I mispronounced his last name. He's on the Capricorn Aquarius cusp. From an energetic standpoint, he's even more aligned with some of the consciousness of the country right now. Yeah. Which is how, I call him a kid in his 30s. He's phenomenally bright, but he's still so young from a presidential politics standpoint. But because energetically, he's so remarkably aligned right now with the needs of the country, like he just keeps moving higher, moving higher, moving higher. Yep. You never would have expected in past years that a gay 30-something-year-old would even have a shot. And yet I think he's pulling forth now in a field of 20 some odd candidates with nothing more than, mayoral background. It's really remarkable, but that speaks to the astrological congruencies. And Elizabeth Warren would be second from an astrological standpoint of the needs of the country, because it's the compassion of the Cancer combined with the communication skills of the Gemini just to keep people engaged.
And she's also extreme, like Pete Buttigieg, I guess I don't know how to pronounce it. But anyway, they're both like two of the brightest on the stage there.
They're way out ahead.
Yeah.
They're way out ahead. And if you're if you believe that intelligence can find intelligent solutions, then you're going to gravitate to one of those candidates for sure.
I just think he's too young. I think he's got a great political future, but I think he's too young right now.
I get it. And yet all the while he keeps incrementing higher and increment that astrological energy. And if he were 10 years older, I think it would be lights out. I think it would just be easy for him to carry it away. But by virtue of him having the astrology on his side, it's allowed him to get as far. Combined with his intelligence. But in any other year, if he had run, let's say he was in his mid-30s and he'd run 4 years ago, wouldn't have even had a shot. But now, based on what the country's been through in the last 3 years or so, which is an accentuation of the energy that's been building for so many years before it, people are going to look to greater stability and a higher, a more compassionate, more understanding mentality to carry through to the next phase. So the other thing that I'm going to point out, and this one is actually a really nice placement, but it does kind of call us back into the same general discussion, is you have your North Node. So in an astrological sense, every house has both a practical energy and a spiritual energy, right? So you have a lot of energy in the first house, which we've talked about quite a bit. The first house on practical energy is, how do I present? How does the world experience me? How do I see myself? But it's really asking more fundamentally, who am I? Right? In a spiritual context, who am I? Who am I really? How many years have to go by for you to say, I know who I am? Right? And that's the first house energy in a spiritual sense, which is really saying, what was it that my soul tried to experience by inhabiting this body in this culture at this time? Who am I? But then it's complemented by your North Node, which is a spiritual calling, which is really what your soul wanted to call you to for greatest growth. And that's in the 10th house. The 10th house, you have two other placements there. You've done fine with that. The 10th house is really legacy and accomplishment, long-term planning and goals. You have a few planets there, but you also have your North Node, which is saying, ask that question on a spiritual basis. So it's not, what did I come here to accomplish? But it's actually saying, what are the gifts that I have? And have I put those gifts to good use?
Okay. There's a part of me, I took a class at Bloomsbury at this place, I can't even remember the name of it now, but anyway, it was called Writing a Novel. And I wrote the novel and people were really interested, and there was sort of a spiritual aspect to the novel. And then the guy, the really big agent, was like, I don't like the spiritual stuff. I'm like, well, sorry, that's kind of the stuff I'm going to write.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that maybe my calling may be in writing a novel that have spiritual elements. Writing novels that have spiritual elements to them. I just have to fight to get it published. I sort of kind of tried again and then
So there's now a lot of books get self-published, and they move up the ranks on those Amazon self-published ranks, like those scales.
Mhm.
A lot of people skip the whole publishing thing altogether, and they just manage their own blogs, or obviously they create online content.
Mhm.
There's so many different avenues. I kind of, and it's sitting, that North Node is sitting in Leo, which is it wants it to be about you. It wants it to be more about your journey. It wants it to be about a little bit of your thoughts and experiences. It wants you to call into self and take some of those deep lessons and bring that out to an audience. But it's like, 10th house being practical in its accomplishments, but it's really like, what are you here to do? Like this is all kind of coming to a head right now. There's the Saturn return. There's the desire to get back to Europe, but not being in Europe like for long enough to know that that's where you want to be, combined with a difficult work environment of an atmosphere that you're looking for nuggets that you can hold on to say it's okay to be here, when all the while 90% of your energy in that space is just wearing you out.
Yep. And dissipating any bit of not self-knowledge and propulsion that I have. I mean, I'm better than I was when I left. When I left, I was like, get me the hell out of here, and I'm never coming back.
Yeah,
And when I come back, I was like, oh my God, I can't get stuck in this energy. I took my moving trucks came with all of my stuff in storage, and I finally said, enough. I don't want it. I'm starting completely new. I don't care what's in those trucks. Take it away.
it's
And I
not,
got
it's not
everything
about
I
that.
owned.
Yeah,
You know,
it's not about that.
yeah.
You're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
It's not about that. And to be frank, like, you'll know when you're in flow as you do, and it won't be because of the things around you. It will be the energy that you're being influenced by. It will be that feeling when you go out and the sun is on your face, and it's just like, wow, like everything is as it should be.
Yeah.
Like there's a sensitivity. It's what you're describing. There's a call to be in the right atmosphere, all those things culminating. And then of course the independence of being raised without a father and a mother that you weren't completely connected to, which set you on this path at a very early age.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is all kind of coming full circle, and the story of your existence and your being is now starting to show itself for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you're putting the right building blocks in place,
Mm-hmm.
it will put you on that path that as Saturn's return comes to fruition, it will leave you very well aligned for what you want to do with the third chapter.
I think one of the things, and I know that we have to go, I think one of the things that is the fear of not having the financial stability, because I grew up with financial instability with my mother.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been doing is getting my house in order, literally and figuratively, but my little house here in Georgetown, and making it more beautiful because I like being around, beautiful things.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm doing this because I'm going to sell it and I'm going to buy a property in Portugal. So, but then that scares me because I think,
Yeah. And so, let's see, you're actually, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so it's funny because every so often my finance background ends up kicking in these conversations as well. So, when it comes to something like that, it's really just a matter of getting good financial planning in order, which is understanding, the implications of selling it, and then obviously taking into account any transaction fees, any tax consequences, and then looking at the alternative of where the money could go.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people will do the sale versus the potential of renting out the property to the right tenant, and then looking at the cash flow that comes off of it and seeing how far that carries them should they once again become an expat. So like if it's a really nice house in Georgetown and it can generate however many thousands a month,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the differential between renting a place abroad and living off the cash flow from the place back in the States versus selling it outright and just buying a place in Portugal, like all those kind of conversations, like all those details, if you will, they come together in just a simple financial planning discussion that you can have a financial planner bring it together for you. And you're in a good real estate market, and you've got real Georgetown is some of the most valuable real estate in the country.
Yeah. And I bought it at the right time where I don't have a big mortgage and I could sell it and make 500,000-600,000, which is, not too bad.
No, and that becomes your ticket right out to Portugal potentially.
Yeah, I think it's something like 400,000. I'd have to look again. The golden visa.
You know what? You've got the euro hovering around 110 right now.
I
You
know.
know?
When I was living there, it was like I started. It was like 170.
Yeah, the euro, it was ridiculous. I remember when I moved to London the first time, it was almost 2 to 1 on the dollar.
Yeah.
And you go out to eat, and I was like, this is crappy British food. And this was back in 2005. I'm like, this is crappy British food. Why did I just pay $200 for it? You know, it was so obnoxious.
No, I know. They got a better a little better selection now, but boy,
The food has gotten so much better with all the foreigners that have poured in over the last 15 years.
yeah,
And with the sterling now at a 125 or 127, whatever it is, things feel really affordable.
yeah, I can imagine it probably does.
But Europe in general, Portugal is still very affordable. I spent a few months in Italy. That was wonderfully affordable.
Did you and is your income solely this business you have now? What you're
This,
doing?
yeah, so I have some savings, and I have some investments that generate a little bit of passive income.
Yeah.
You know, and to be frank, I broke from the want. I broke from the needs, if you will. You know,
Mhm.
like a big part of my journey was to no longer feel the call to, I just don't feel the call to experiences the way I used to. So I used to, need to travel and go out and clubs or a lot of events and stuff. Not even a lot, but enough that would add a huge expense to my monthly run.
Mhm.
I don't do a lot of that anymore. I'm a bit of a homebody these days. But then on top of it, I I also don't accumulate anything from a material standpoint, and I never had a really strong materialistic mindset, but it got weaker and weaker. If you ever read the autobiography of a yogi, which
Oh
is,
yeah, I have it, and I haven't read it.
I know, so I pick it up, I read a chapter or two, and then I put it back down. I read some other spiritual book, but there's a great line in there where he's early in his journey and he ends up meeting a worker. His father was running the railroad. He met a worker for the railroad.
Mhm.
And he said the man had retired and he was just on his spiritual path. And he says, "Oh, you were able to retire with the pension from the railroad at an early age." He says, "That's wonderful." He says, "Well, no, I have two pensions. I have what the railroad gives me, that's very small. But I also broke from want. I broke from the material realm, and that became my second pension."
Interesting.
And
And
that connected with me so deeply,
yeah.
because the fewer things that I have, the simpler my life has become over the years. The more I've been able to focus on my spiritual intent, the less I worry about the material. And it's really been, and it also afforded me the luxury. Like you don't become an astrologer to become rich, so to speak.
Right.
Like it's not my way. I love talking to people. I love feeling like I'm helping them. And then I like the idea of taking some of these videos and just sharing them with other people, because so many other people are kind of trapped in the same space.
Mhm.
And so if they can see like our conversations unfold, they may not have the same astrological placements,
Mhm.
but you become an inspiration. Like they see somebody else who's worked through it and has brought ideas and changes in their life through courage and struggle, that then becomes kind of a reinforcing consciousness that allows other people to jump on this journey. And it just makes me feel great. And so I got my finances to a place where I was like, okay, if I don't have a strong desire for things, combined with a bit of passive income, combined with a few bucks from doing these readings, I think I can sustain it for an awfully long time and just live in a spiritual space.
Oh, that sounds like heaven to me.
But I think you can do it too. I think you can do it too. And I think if you don't know what you're going to be good at and what's going to be productive and successful for you until you try it. So
Yeah.
whether it's something, I love the idea of you just being in a healing space because you have so much of that energy in your chart.
Mhm.
So whether it's acupuncture, whether it's some type of spiritual talk therapy, you don't need a ton of accreditations for it. Like, there's all sorts of different venues you can go into, whether it's writing a book, which may or may not ever generate revenue, but may help crystallize some of the ideas in your mind and just get you organized. Like all of those things, you can start to do them now with whatever time you have in your hands and whatever energy. I know your work environment might sap your energy a bit. But if you just like, I've been studying astrology now for years, but it
Mhm.
wasn't until these last few months, maybe the last year. Okay, it's about 2 years now that people have been paying me to do the readings, even though I've been doing them for many years before that. And I
Mhm.
finally got the courage to say, enough's enough, Allan. like, this is where you want to be. Just, you only go around once
Yeah.
in this incarnation. I don't want to look back with regret of the things I didn't do.
Yeah. I know. And I feel that way too. I mean, I'm a lot older than you, but I'm right exactly where you are.
Yeah, you're
You know,
not actually you're not a lot older, and remarkably, I say, I mean, I'm in my mid 40s, so it's not like a huge age difference,
you
but
look marvelous, Allan. You look so much younger.
yeah,
Like 10 years younger than that.
I studied nutrition as well, so
Okay.
and I've had, and this was part of my journey, is that my digestive system has always been sensitive. As my energetic space was more and more misaligned, I had nervous system issues and digestive system issues. My body was basically screaming at me to find a different way forward. And so I had to study nutrition just to kind of stay in the game, if you will. So ironically, it's kind of kept me youthful in that regard, even though there was a lot of health challenges that came with being terribly misaligned. And people have mental issues, they have physical issues. The body and the mind are telling you what the soul is trying to communicate. The body and the mind become like the I don't know, it's like the litmus. It becomes the indicator of whether or not you're in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how sensitive you become to your environment and whether or not you feel healthy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm not talking like you can fall down and break your leg. Okay, you broke your leg, although spiritual gurus would say that was part of a karmic intention. But I'm saying, like, when you start to develop weird mental or emotional or, of course, physical ailments that don't have a clear diagnosis, that don't carry a clear treatment, that seem to just kind of unsettle you on a regular basis. And there's so many people right now in the US that feel so disconnected from a healthy consciousness, and they've lost their soul, you know, because it's become so materialistic in so many ways, and there's so much fear coursing through the system, which is the lowest vibrational energy, that it's really causing a lot of these bizarre ailments, that people are buying supplements and changing their diet and, you know, going in and out of doctors constantly, and they're just not finding solutions the way they would hope.
Wow. That, to hear you say that and articulate it the way you did really helps.
Oh,
Really helps. Really does. That was really good.
God.
Yeah.
I really like talking with you.
I know. I like talking with you too. I was going to say, I have to have I have to do this again really soon, because I feel like we kind of touched the surface, and I need to go surface, and I need to go a little deeper.
And I am happy to go as deep as you'd like.
Okay.
By all means, yeah, just book another appointment. Do you mind? You don't mind? You don't mind if I post this for others?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Great.
No, it's fine. I had said it's fine. If it helps other people, I'm happy.
I know. So it's kind of 50-50. Half of the people that read feel the same way. Sometimes the readings get really very personal. And so I'm always, of course, it's about the client. It's not about getting the reading up there. And so we either edit it, or sometimes we just don't post it all together. And that's, of course, that's fine. But this is a good one, because there's, for every one person like that has this conversation the way that we just had, I think there's probably another 1,000 or maybe even 10,000 that would benefit from this kind of conversation that have no access to it.
Yeah.
You know, and this is my big complaint. This is my big pain, is that had somebody like me been in my world 10 years ago, I would have changed my life dramatically a decade ago.
Yeah.
I don't know what it would have looked like. I know that the path is the path, and that we don't question why we are where we are. We just grow to acceptance for what is. And I've worked a lot around that. But I would have loved this to have been more of the collective consciousness, these type of conversations, just to say, hey, there's a mind and a body, but there's also a spirit or a soul, and that is calling you into alignment. And if you're not in alignment, then you really need to do yourself the service of asking why. Like, what is it that's misaligned?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's the city you're living in, sometimes your career. Some people have all sorts of nutritional deficiencies. They don't have any awareness of it because they're eating the all-American diet, and they're being told that pizza is healthy, you know, and French fries are a vegetable. Like,
I know. I get my meals delivered to me recently, because I'm just not in the mood to cook. I just don't have any desire, and I love to cook, but I just don't have any desire. And they are so healthy that I'm almost getting sick of them. It's like I'm sick of kale and sweet potatoes.
I know. And the crazy thing is that you need good energy around the nutrition while you're consuming it. That's
Yep.
the other thing. So people are like, oh, I want to be really healthy, but I hate the food that I'm eating. Then I'll say, well, then you're not eating the right foods,
Yep.
right? Like it's good to adjust the palate into more of what I call God's diet, which is fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, berries, clean animal-based protein from organic sources,
Mm-hmm.
clean grains, all that jazz. But you have to enjoy the food you're eating, because if you have a negative impression every time you take a bite, the body won't assimilate the nutrition well anyways.
Yeah.
And once again, that starts to call into all sorts of biochemical and spiritual intention. You know, you see these yogis hanging out, barely eating, and they eat so methodically, and they're so present with their food, and they're so healthy, and they live to be a gazillion years old, and they just don't worry about it. And then you
Yeah.
go like in the US, and there's a million one people telling you what you should and shouldn't eat, and there's so much anxiety and food fear. It's like, oh,
It's so confusing, and it's so defeating. It
it's so
really is.
confusing, it's so defeating.
And it's I got to the point where I had to shut it off
I
because I
know.
couldn't listen to it. And there's also a theory too that if you a lot of the commercials that come on where they have like Burger King and all these, Checkers hamburgers, and if you watch it, your body feels like it's eating it, and you can gain weight just by watching.
It's amazing how
Yeah.
I know, because, and we don't realize just how powerful our subconscious is.
And it's dumb. It's really dumb, the
Well,
subconscious.
yeah, I know.
I mean,
I can talk. I can talk about this all day long. We'll get into it in our next conversation.
yeah.
But I'll just leave you with that thought. If you've the most pressing example of that is if you've experienced a trauma in the past and you keep recycling it, the mind actually thinks that you're still reliving that trauma.
Yeah. Same principle. Yeah.
And so there is something to be said for what you went through with your work environment and the disruption of coming back against your will, for example, and then the energy that lingered. Like some of the neuroplasticity work to properly rewire or just to release a little of that anxiety would probably be really healthy.
Mm-hmm.
The spiritual conversations give you the awareness of it, but then there's all sorts of practical tools to properly heal any of the actual neurological kind of imprint, if you will.
I'm actually doing CBD with a therapist who's lived in Tibet. He's like a really interesting kind of. It's very spiritual,
Nice.
and I said to him, I want practical therapy. I need to get past these things in my life. So I've been working with him for years. So that's helped an awful lot.
Perfect.
And he deals a lot with the subconscious. So
yeah, you have to.
Yep. Anyway, I know we've gone over, and I
It's
apologize
okay.
for that.
It's okay. I've got another reading in 15 minutes, but this is a brilliant conversation. Like I said, it's not about the money, and I don't like to feel like I'm being restricted. So if the conversation is just flowing, the last thing I'm going to do is cut it short. But yeah, I'll post this up online. I'll send you the link, and then we can also, whenever you'd like, just reach out. We'll go deeper. And
Yeah.
send a few questions in advance, areas specifically you want to get into, and I can look at transits and I can look at some of the conjunctions. You have 5 conjunctions in your chart, which is the combination of energies that end up creating more focal points for your life. So I can carry into all sorts of the aspects and conjunctions as well.
That would be great. I will go ahead and book.
Deep as you want.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Allan.